I think it's important for us to understand kind of where we are along a continuum of some kind in terms of how we've managed the question of doing diversity right in the area of marketing, advertising, content, et cetera. And the reality of it is we've gone through a variety of phases of that process. The first phase that we've identified is a phase that we call representation. And representation really defined as when diversity was used as a way to kind of appease a constituency, or maybe even as a way of capitalizing on it. The example that we use internally quite a bit is the idea of the very famous Benetton campaign from the late 80s, early 90s, where sure, it was diverse in the sense that we had a lot of different colored people, but the usage of that diversity was really meant to accentuate a product feature, the fact that we had very colorful clothing as an example. So that might be an example of that first phase, which was really all about representation.
And I think for a long time, for a lot of diverse people, we're just excited to show up. Like, frankly, whenever, whenever content showed up or we were part of it, we're just excited that we're part of it.
Exactly.
But I think the reality that was sort of, that lived its own life right there. And as we moved on in terms of marketing and storytelling, then we moved on to our second phase. Why don't we talk about that?
The second phase, and again, this is all shorthand, but we've called it the authenticity phase. And what that means is when we've actually leaned in to trying to find a diverse story, an authentically diverse story, and have used it to deliver an ad campaign, to tell a narrative, to do a variety of different things. But we're doing it as a means to reach a broader audience. So think about it as a way of using a diverse, authentic story, but to reach the general market. And some of the examples that you and I talk about all the time is a movie like Disney's Coco as an example, or maybe even more recently, Disney's Encanto as another example, right? Authentic stories, but they're not made just for the audience that perhaps inspired the story. But if they weren't authentic, they wouldn't reach either that audience or the kind of greater audience.
And the counterintuitive thing here for both storytelling and for marketing is like the more authentic that story is, the more it actually resonates with a broader group. Right?
Correct.
So that's part of the value you see there. By the way, you've seen this dynamic in music all the time, right? That's why you think about a lot of the music, especially you think about hip hop music, how much it resonated with a lot of people, even though people didn't have that kind of experiences, that you can see that experience, that it was real for those people that were talking about it, and therefore it actually connected more with a lot more people.
100%. Yeah. And then the last phase that we identify beyond authenticity is kind of the phase that we're moving into now, right? The phase that we're moving into now is a phase that we've called impact. And that's when we're trying to go beyond the story, beyond just telling or highlighting stories of people in diverse communities, to actually making a difference in those very communities. And we think that that's kind of the next stage of the evolution of diversity marketing. And that's the stage that we're in right now. To some extent, we've been moving towards that direction for a while, but it's been dramatically accelerated by the effects of COVID and the effects of finding ourselves in a post-George Floyd moment.
What was interesting about that, look, for a long time in the business world, we talked about if you want to keep, sort of have good relationships, you sort of leave politics and religion out of the conversation, right? Or even in a dining table, right? If you want to have a good dinner, leave that out. But the reality, there's been this overlap now of issues that have also been brought into the business world. And the reality, even consumers themselves are much more looking at what role these different brands are playing, how they're activating, how they're actually creating, being part of solutions, which is, I think, is going to start to matter more and more from a marketing perspective, which is kind of the new trend that we're seeing now.
Correct. So I think that would be an encapsulation of the evolution of diverse marketing.